Welcome to Draft Central's 2020 AFL Draft coverage live. I'm your host Siobhan Rowe and I'll be taking you through the pre-show. We'll be answering your questions and discussing key topics such as who will be the number one pick, what live trades to expect, the different types of options in the forward line, in the midfield and in defence, and the numerous players that are tipped to go in the top 5. I'm joined by Michael Alvaro and Peter Williams, who will be alongside me to realise many young men's dreams in the next few hours.
Yeah, it's quite an exciting night tonight, our favourite night of the year. Obviously, you know, all the work that all these young men have put in throughout the year and throughout their previous years finally comes to fruition. Obviously, for a lot of players, they'll end up on a list. For a lot of others, they won't. But there's always next year, as we've found with mature ages. So it's an exciting time, and we're very happy to sort of bring you the content tonight. Really looking forward to it, Michael.
Yeah, me too. Super pumped to see how it all unfolds, and I think it's going to be a really rewarding night, not just for us, but obviously for all the players, list managers, coaches involved. After such an arduous and unpredictable year, it's going to be a great reward for all those guys.
The question that is on everyone's lips: who are the contenders to go at the number one pick in the 2020 National Draft?
Well, I think the consensus is now, Pete, that we're down to 4 players. Obviously, Adelaide holds all the power with pick number 1, so I think a lot of the attention has surrounded the 2 talls in Riley Thilthorpe and Logan McDonald, obviously key forward types. Thilthorpe can also play as a ruck, so it's local talent versus a West Australian, and then of course Jamara Ugle-Hagen's been the prospect who tops most power rankings at this stage of the year still, and Elijah Hollands is another Victorian in the mix, a midfielder who might be around the mark, Pete.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting one to see what they do. Obviously, we know that the Western Bulldogs are going to match Jamara Ugle-Hagen, so we know that regardless if Adelaide place the bid, that Western Bulldogs will go and match that bid without any problems whatsoever. So realistically, even if he is the number one pick, we know that he won't be Adelaide's first selection, which makes it more interesting in that sense, and obviously leaves the 3 remaining if they go for that tall, or whether they go for that sort of the best available in terms of the medium in Elijah Hollands. So it's going to be quite a night and quite one to sort of kick us off on, I would definitely say.
What will be the biggest live trade of the night, and will this shape the rest of the draft?
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting one, I think, for the live trading, because obviously for the first time in quite a while, we're going to have a lot of top 10 picks that could potentially already be aligned to clubs. Obviously, we just spoke about Jamara Ugle-Hagen, potentially at pick 1, but certainly in the top 3. And then we go look at down the order, we've got Lockie Jones, who's Port Adelaide NGA, and Reef McInnes, who's Collingwood NGA. Of course, Braden Campbell, most likely before both of them, for the Sydney Northern Academy. So already that's already 4 that could potentially go in that top, say, 10 to 12 or so picks. So already about a third of the players that are taken in that top group are going to be attached to clubs, which makes it so fascinating in that regard. And in terms of sort of the live trading, I think that it means that clubs are going to be a lot more wary of what they tend to do. Like obviously Essendon have 3 picks in there. They could use that hand to improve. They could go up and back to be able to get an even higher pick potentially, and then maybe have one in the teens. Utilise the chance at maybe threatening to bid on some of those players in their range. And then, of course, we've got GWS with a whole hand from sort of pick 10 through to 20. They've got a heap of those sort of 5 selections in there, and they could do a lot of damage in that range. So they could look to trade up. And then, of course, we've got Collingwood, who are sitting sort of pretty with that pick 14 and pick 16. We think they're going to do something, whether it's for Adelaide sort of 9 and 23, which is a huge chance, or whether they do try and go even further up the order, whether they can convince a team, whether it's a Gold Coast or an Essendon or someone like that, potentially to get one of their picks and be well entrenched in that sort of top 10.
Yeah, I think also the interesting part there, a lot of the things that you covered, it's all at the top end. So that's what makes the draft so intriguing this year. And given it's the most compromised we've had, a lot of the action's going to be happening early on. So definitely stay tuned and get locked in.
Essendon have an enviable draft hand, one that could shape the club for years to come. They currently hold picks 6, 7 and 8. What do you guys think Essendon does with their draft picks?
Yeah, well, I mean, you tell me, Siobhan. It's anyone's guess, I think. It's such a flexible hand that they've got, and there's just so many outcomes that could happen, depending on what happens with pick 1. You know, that might change what Essendon sort of go with in terms of their strategy. So, I mean, if they hold on to him, I'd say that sort of big-bodied inside midfielder is the key list need they have. So, you know, a guy like Archie Perkins who can provide a bit of X factor and run and power through the engine room. He's an option. In terms of key position players, Zach Reed and Nick Cox, I think, are the ones that they should go for. Just real versatile tools, guys who have sort of, you know, got some skill about them and versatility. So, I mean, there's plenty there. Even potentially Peter a bit on a couple of academy members.
Yeah, I mean, Essendon are in the position where they could bid on a Reef McInnes or a Lockie Jones even potentially, make those teams earn it. Probably more so for the McInnes as he fits a real list need and we know that they're keen on him. And potentially you never know that if there was a slider from that sort of top 5, you know, a Denver Granger Barras potentially, if he was to somehow slip past those first few, then he would definitely be on Essendon's radar, you'd think, and getting a ready-made key position defender in would be fantastic for them. So they're in a really top position, you'd have to say, with what they're able to do. And not only could they, you know, potentially trade up or back or whatever they want to do, they could potentially just take the draft picks to the actual draft and select 3 players. So they don't technically need to do anything, really.
Where do the first round of Next Generation Academy and or Northern Academy bids come in? We know there are a high number of players with extreme talent at the top end of the pool.
Yeah, I mean, well, the first one's going to come in within the top 3, we think. Obviously, Jamari Ugelhagen's going to be the first NGA off the board, tied to the Western Bulldogs. So if it's not Adelaide, if it's not North Melbourne, it's definitely going to be Sydney, and that helps them out then with Braden Campbell, who we think will probably be the next academy bid off the board there, Pete.
Yeah, I think Braden Campbell, those two are the clear obvious ones. And then it gets a bit interesting because you've got both Lockie Jones and Reef McInnes in there now. Both, Lockie Jones has sort of stayed pretty steady in terms of his bidding range, anywhere between that, say, 10 to 14 range, where McInnes we've had as late as potentially 20 and then as high as potentially 8 or, you know, one of Essendon's selections in there. So it's going to be really interesting. They could go in either order. And then we've heard about, you know, Blake Coleman potentially copping that top 20 bid, and not far after him, suddenly Errol Goulden comes into the picture as Sydney's second selection there. So they're getting quite a few in that top end, and you've got to keep in mind you've got Connor Downey from Hawthorn that wouldn't be out of the realms of possibility to get a top 30 bid, potentially in the 30s somewhere, but you know he's in there, that mix as well. So like already in the top 30, you've got a real handful, sort of that maybe 7 players or so that are really in the mix for that top 30 that are already aligned to clubs. So it's a real unique scenario, and I don't think that we've really seen anything like it before. We've sort of had a bit of a taste of it, but certainly this year it's full blown in terms of its NGA capabilities.
We're going to take a short ad break. Thanks to RM Coach, powered by Rookie Me. Join us after the ad break, where we will be discussing the probable top 5 prospects in this year's 2020 draft.
Hi, Luke Beveridge here. Coaching has its rewards, but it also has its challenges. So thank you for taking on this important role. To assist the coaching community further, we're excited to introduce you to Rookie Me, the official coaching technology partner of the AFL. The Rookie Me team have developed RM Coach, an innovative online coaching platform for AFL accredited coaching. RM Coach hosts an extensive library of drills, coaching tools and educational information in line with AFL curriculum. This season, take your coaching to the next level. RM Coach, evolve the game.
Welcome back to Draft Central's comprehensive coverage of the 2020 AFL Draft. On Tuesday, we had a question and answer session in our pre-draft show where we answered lots of your questions with our panel of Peter and Michael. We have some more questions sent in by viewers. Thank you to everyone who has submitted questions. A question from Lucy. How significantly compromised is this draft for clubs that aren't linked to Next Generation Academy players? Who are linked to clubs at the top end?
Yeah, well, I think it's something we've sort of somewhat covered a little bit, especially at the top end. But, we sort of glossed over Fremantle's picks. They've obviously got Brandon Walker and Joel Weston there, who might be top 30 prospects for other clubs. And, I mean, in terms of being compromised, it just means that all these other clubs don't have access to, the number one player in the pool, a couple who could probably go top 10. So it just makes them a little wary of, that potential bid having to go through the process. Do you want to actually do that, given that you're probably not going to have access to the player at the end of the day? So, it complicates things a bit, and it's made this draft a little bit of a historic one, and one that's made the rules sort of change for the next couple of years. So, Pete, I know your club's involved, Collingwood. It's going to have big ramifications and just confuses fans a lot as well, I think.
Yeah, I think it's going to be one that's unlike anything we've ever seen before. We know the first bid's going to come in the first couple of picks with Jamari Ugelhagen, as we touched on. But even as the draft goes on, there's going to be bidding throughout. As we've said, there could be four sort of definitely top 12 or 13 picks. Particularly if Reeve McInnes does cop one in there. He might drift a bit later, but obviously Collingwood will be, hopefully can. But we know that Lockie Jones will be around that region. We know that Braden Campbell, of course, will be in that top 10, potentially top 5 or so. But, they're just in that top bracket alone. There's, Errol Goulden, Connor Downey. We've sort of mentioned this previously, but, they've got so many that are sort of in there that, it's going to be an interesting decision, particularly those that are coming late. I know Brisbane, Adelaide, even Port to an extent with Taj Schofield. Like, there's a fair few, not just academy, they're father-son, some of them, obviously, in terms of Schofield, but you've got your academy, your Northern Academy prospects that are coming through. Gold Coast have access. It's worth also noting Alex Davies, Joel Jeffrey is an example of a couple that have gone through that process, but we've seen last year with Brisbane how they had a couple of players, Will Martin, Noah Cumberland, who received a bid from Richmond, and they weren't matched, so therefore they went to Richmond. So even though they do have priority on these players, it does not mean that they'll end up at those clubs. It just means it gives the clubs first access to those players.
We have a question from Sophia. Are we expecting a significantly reduced amount of players to be selected due to the cut in list sizes? If so, do we expect players that would have been selected in the past to miss out and take the longer road into the AFL?
Yeah, well, I think it's going to be an interesting one. Again, like for this, we do think that there'll probably be anywhere from that mid-40s to potentially maybe 60 players in that bracket. Now, normally we might see it go down to, say, 80 or 85, something around there, sometimes in the 70s. But this year, obviously, with the list cuts and everything like that, we're probably going to see as little as sort of third-round picks. We know that the AFL's reduced it, so clubs only have to take one selection. Gold Coast is a perfect example. They've got that really high pick at 5, which will probably go to potentially 7 by the time the couple of bids come in for Ugelhagen and Campbell, but they've got that one pick, and then they probably won't do anything else because the way that they're situated is that they're able to pre-list players and they need the one pick. And then you've got someone like a West Coast as well that come into the draft very, very late with that sort of pick 62, and depending on what they do, they're more inclined to sort of just sit there and wait for their pick, take their one player and get out as well. So there's some teams we'll see only taking one pick, and then on the other end of the scale, you've got someone like a Collingwood that will probably make up a fair portion of the draft because they've got to make up that 5 or 6 picks. So I think it'll be a case-by-case basis, Michael.
Yeah, and for the kids who miss out, there's going to be a lot of hard luck stories, inevitably, obviously with the cut list sizes and less players being taken on in general. But there's still plenty of avenues that they can get to the top level. If you're good enough, you're going to be found. So, keep working at it. That's all I can sort of tell you. But there's obviously the mid-season drafts next year, which will be multiple. So, plenty of avenues for those players to get found out and picked up.
Great advice there from Michael Alvaro. Another question that's come in from Brendan. Are teams going to be picking based on needs or best players available? And I think that goes back to list cuts as well.
Well, I guess it kind of depends on what team, Pete. So, I mean, some clubs will be sort of boosting players' value because they've got a specific need. So, you look at sort of clubs towards the bottom end of the ladder, teams like Essendon even, who will sort of target those inside mids, you might sort of inflate the range of players like Archie Perkins, Reef McInnes into that top 10 range. So it really depends on which club's got the picks, where they are and what they're going for. I know a team like GWS, they don't particularly have a sort of list need that they want to cover. They feel like they're quite even across the board and they've got some good depth. So they're just looking to top up, considering, they've got 5 picks in the top 30. So, it really depends on which club has the power and where their list is at.
Yeah, certainly. I think that in terms of the different clubs, that when you have pick one, for example, Adelaide, do they go with a need? Do they go with best available? Generally, as a rule of thumb, most people would go with best available with pick one, but then their need might fall into that best available. So it depends whether they see one of the talls as the best available, or whether they see someone like a Elijah Hollands or potentially Will Phillips. Who knows what they might pull out? But that's an example. Like obviously, whether it's a Hollands, McDonald, Tilthorpe, or Ugelhagen with the bid. So starting at pick one, it really depends. But someone like an Essendon or GWS who do have multiple picks, they've got that option to potentially pick up a need or two and still go best available because they've got those selections. Where for a team that potentially only has one high pick, they might just go for best available. Whereas if they've got a lot of later picks, they can probably afford to take punts on perhaps players that fill needs rather than best available if they feel that those players can be developed into certain roles at the club. So I think it really depends on the different clubs' hands and what they're after in the draft.
Thank you to everyone who sent in questions. The top selection of this year's draft pool oozes talent. With a mixture of talls with freakish ability and dynamic midfielders, the AFL is in good hands. Let's start with one of the most talked about draft prospects, Jamarra Ugelhagen, an NGA prospect tied to the Western Bulldogs, a key position forward standing at 195 centimetres and 90 kilos. What type of ability will he bring to the Western Bulldogs? We know a lot about him and his freakish ability, but what will he bring to the Dogs?
Yeah, well, Ugelhagen's probably one of those prospects that a lot of people who even aren't familiar with the draft crop as such, or might just sort of read up a little bit on it, will be aware of this kid. And he's been someone who's no stranger the last couple of years since the 16s, really standing out when he played for the Rebels. And then coming through that sort of program, he obviously crossed to Oakley, won a premiership there. Really, I think last year he had a quiet round one, but then after that he really broke out. And that second half of the season, particularly like finals, he really started to show why he's a pick one contender. And I think for us throughout the year, we've sort of had him as pegged as the best prospect in the draft. And it's easy to see why. He's an elite athlete. Like there aren't too many 195 centimetre players who can sort of run that 2.9 20 metre sprint, and he still averages about 2 contested marks a game, which is remarkable for a player who realistically could add quite a bit of size to his frame. Like he weighed in at 90 kilos at the end of the year, but we know that he's still lightly built compared to some others, so it will be quite interesting to see how he develops, and he's one I'm certainly looking forward to.
Me too, Pete. I mean, what a star this kid's going to be. He's got all the traits that sort of stand out and appeal to fans. So, not only is he going to be a great player in his own right, but in terms of how he fits into the Dogs system, he's going to be alongside Aaron Norton, who's one of the most exciting key forwards in the game right now. So, those two in tandem, aerial force is going to be big for the Doggies in the years to come.
Another key position prospect, Logan McDonald from Western Australia, standing at 196 centimetres and 86 kilos, a key forward. What are some of the elite traits that he can bring to the club that chooses him?
Well, he's just so consistent and reliable as a key forward option. I mean, he's had a stellar season at senior level in the Waffle League there with Perth, helping them to a final series. He was leading the goal kicking for a long time there as well. And even when he's sort of out of games, he'll find a way to kick multiple goals. So he's one who can sort of be played close to goal, but he's got that elite endurance, I guess a little bit like Nick Rewalt, where he can run up the ground, find the ball there. And in terms of his sort of set shot range and goal kicking, he can find the goals from all angles and distances. So plenty of there for his sort of forward craft, and he's got just those elite traits that make him a sort of lock for that top three.
Yeah, he's definitely one that I think in terms of ready-made key forwards, like we know that Ugelhagen won't be too far off in terms of stepping up, but certainly McDonald already played seniors, has that elite tank. He's already been able to do it against, senior bodies, experienced players, ex-AFL players, etc. He's already able to take those contested marks. He's got that forward craft, as Michael touched on. He's, good at one-on-ones. So he's someone that I think won't be too far off. And particularly for a developing team, if they were to take him, then he could step straight in and play a role. And he's sort of got the body to really match it and be able to compete from early on.
As a North Melbourne supporter, that brings me nothing but a smile to my face. An explosive midfielder and medium forward in Elijah Hollands from the Murray Bushrangers is another prospect right at the top of the draft pool. At 189 centimetres and 85 kilos, he is a tantalising prospect for clubs.
Yeah, Elijah Hollands, obviously, he's one of my favourite players to watch. In terms of outside the tools, he's clearly the standout. In terms of the medium sort of forward midfielder prototype, if you like. He's got that bigger body, that's sort of 189. Still could add some more size to his frame. He's obviously been out the whole year due to an ACL injury. Now, obviously that's been the case for all Victorian prospects in the end, missing a lot of footy. But he was someone who was definitely touted as a number one prospect. Probably the biggest challenger realistically to Jamara last year, and still could be the number one prospect. Just a really high impact per possession forward. He does so much damage. He can kick goals pretty much left, right, doesn't matter. He's so dual-sided, can kick him from 50, anywhere you like. He's just got that X factor. He's someone who's going to be really exciting in the future. And I guess the real question mark just sort of comes over how he bounces back from his injury. But he's good to go now. He obviously trained the other day at the Victorian training session. You're on hand to sort of see him there, Michael, and it was good to sort of see him back out there.
Yeah, it was awesome. I mean, he's one of my favourite players also, just in the way he presents. He's such a top kid, just real personable kind of guy, so that's always a bonus. And, he's been really positive, I think, throughout his recuperation from that long-term knee injury, and it's going to hold him in good stead heading into next year. Maybe he could even make an impact sort of straight away. So depending on where he goes, could be Adelaide, could be North Melbourne, could even be a little later. So we'll wait and see with that. But yeah, as Pete said, high impact sort of player who's just dynamic and can do a fair bit from midfield and going forward as well.
A key forward and ruckman from South Australia in Riley Thilthorpe with plenty of upside is in pick one calculations for the Crows at 201 centimetres and 100 kilos. What would he bring to Adelaide if he was to be selected at pick one?
Fair bit, I think. I think it's a player that South Australians and Adelaideans, if that's what you call them, would be really happy with. Obviously, the local boy, he can, he's that 200 centimetre player who can roam through the ruck and forward. You're not going to find too many sort of high level players who can do that. He's also 100 kilograms already, so I mean, you look at ready-made players, maybe he's a bit less durable. He's had a few injury concerns, but, I wouldn't say there's many tools that are being drafted at around that sort of, size and weight at the moment. So, a great option. He's super at ground level for his size and just competes. He's got great mobility and pretty handy disposal as well for a tall.
Yeah, he's certainly a player that I think, had he not had, the injury interruptions over the journey, I think he's definitely one that would have been talked up as a genuine, even more so top one pick, particularly given the Vics hadn't played. If he'd been able to get out even more, he could have even got higher. But look, he's still very much in contention for that pick one if Adelaide decide to go that way, and he's certainly deserving too. He's got that ability both in the air and at ground level, which makes him so unique. Particularly his contested work. He's just, he's elite in that area. And if he does slide, then someone's going to get a really good value pickup with that, because he's a great contested mark. He's not too bad when he does, laying tackles or things like that. So he's certainly someone who's got a lot of ticks around his whole game style and what he's able to produce, because he's been able to do it at senior level, which has been important, that he's able to come in and have an immediate impact really at that senior level.
Another Victorian midfield prospect in Will Phillips from the Oakley Chargers possesses enviable consistency at 180 centimetres and 80 kilos. One of your favourite draft prospects, Michael. Why so?
Well, why not, Siobhan? Oakley's done it again, haven't they? They've got another sort of 180 centimetre mid, like Matt Rao last year, who's just so consistent, and he looks a sort of locked on 200-game AFL player. I think he's the best pure midfielder in the draft. Elijah Hollands might be that sort of, the player who's that medium type that might be taken before him, but in terms of just a pure consistent midfielder, he fits the bill, and I think he could go straight into an AFL team at the next level. Obviously playing alongside Raylan Anderson was great for him last year in that NAB League Premiership side. So, Pete is a player who can sort of do it all in the engine room with his ball winning and that little burst away and just ability to find the ball. Yeah,
he's a remarkable ball winner. Like, in terms of his consistency, he was able to stay in that midfield alongside, Matt Rao and Noah Anderson, as we've sort of touched on. He's someone who realistically could have pushed for that number one spot, certainly if he'd played throughout the year. I think with a lot of clubs, they know what you're going to get out of Phillips. He's just consistent as they come. Doesn't really have too many weaknesses in terms of his overall ability. He's so clean by hand. He's got great defensive pressure. He's able to win the contested ball, rack it up, be consistent. He just doesn't have too many weaknesses, so he does it really, really well.
Looks like there'll be plenty of talent at the top end of the pool, and we look forward to seeing what impact they'll have at their AFL clubs in 2021. We're going to throw to an advertisement, all thanks to RM Coach, powered by Rookie Me. Tune in after the quick break.
The current footy landscape requires more from coaches than ever before. With so much going on, it can be difficult to keep up. That's why the Rookie Me team has developed RM Coach, the AFL accredited coaching platform to help coaches stay organised, educated and on top of their game. Check out coach.rookieme.com. RM Coach, evolve the game.
Welcome back to Draft Central's live coverage of the 2020 National AFL Draft. We're going to take a look at each section of the ground and some of the key players that could be drafted to your club. Starting with the defenders, we have Denver Granger Barras from Western Australia and his teammate Heath Chapman, and from Victoria, Nicholas Cox and Zach Reid, both versatile but can play at the back end of the ground.
Yeah, a little bit to sort of go over there, Pete. Obviously, a couple from Western Australia who I guess are would-be teammates in that state team if the championships went ahead. But Granger Barras from Swan District's obviously a super athletic type who, his key strength is marking overhead. So his interceptability is pretty much second to none in this draft. And if there was one person to challenge him, it might be Chapman. So, they're two pretty similar players in some areas, but Chapman's probably the more, attacking defender. And I know, Pete, a couple of defenders there that Siobhan mentioned in Nick Cox and Zach Reid, dynamic, versatile types that you rate pretty highly.
Yeah, I think that considering their size, they're quite good users of the ball. Like Reid in particular is an elite kick, coming out of defence, and Cox too uses it so well. And They can play at either end if required. Now, obviously, they're predominantly being defenders, but we know Cox can play as that key forward and Reed's pinch hit down that way. But the big thing is they're, that 200 centimetres and above, they're sort of that big, sort of almost ruckman height type size, but they still move fairly well. They're able to use the ball. They're able to contribute really strongly. And I think that they're just a couple of players that provide great value at that end. And they've got huge upside because they're still relatively light, so they can put a lot of, size on. They haven't quite played against the seniors like Granger, Barras, Chapman have, but they've still got a lot of upside in that regard. And, they're a lot of the quality tools that are floating around, but obviously there's still a number of other defenders that are coming in there. Like we know Lockie Jones, for example, about in the mix. So, he's someone who might be considered there. And Ollie Henry as well is one that, is a versatile one. Not quite the same size as Reed or Cox, but he's another one that's quite versatile.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty incredible. All of these players could be considered for the top 10 status, so obviously really highly rated. It's great to have those key position types. I mean, last year we probably didn't have that at the top end, and this year's a lot different, so it goes to show how it can kind of change through each age group. But I mean, Lockie Jones is a player I rate really highly, obviously tied to Port Adelaide as we would have mentioned already, and just a real goer. He's played senior football through the whole year. And Ollie Henry, brother of Jack, down at the Geelong Falcons, super talented kid who's really athletic, dominates in the air, and can play up either end.
Looking into the middle of the ground, there's plenty of talent available, with the likes of Finlay McRae, brother of Western Bulldog Jackson McRae, Alex Davies, a Next Generation Academy prospect tied to the Gold Coast Suns, Jack Carroll, and Nathan O'Driscoll, just to name a few.
Yeah, I think, look, there's quite a few, obviously, midfielders floating around. Like, we know how quality, I guess, in terms of that crop this year there are, and we've already spoken about some of them that are sort of that mid-forward range earlier, like with Hollands, obviously, and we spoke about Phillips. But there's quite a good value down the track as well, and I know you sort of touched on the West Australians there. There's three of them, so that we sort of briefly mentioned. Obviously, you've got Jack Carroll, you've got Zane True and Nathan O'Driscoll as well. Like they're quite flush there, and I think WA would have been a really strong team this year at the Champs. Obviously, they've had success of late at that tournament, so it was great for them to win the most recent one they played. But certainly, they're amongst the top ones. And then, of course, you got Tanner Brune as well, who's just an elite talent and could be top 10 out of the Geelong Falcons. He's had some injuries, but, he's such a classy ball user and, generally inside, but can, move outside when required and impact the scoreboard. But, yeah, I think we've just got so many quality players in this draft, Michael.
Yeah, I mean, let's not forget Tom Powell in this conversation, who's arguably the most consistent and best ball winner in the draft crop. I mean, he averaged over 35 touches per game in the sample under 18s this year and was just a clearance machine. He's got just such clean hands at the coalface and makes really good decisions, mostly by hand. I mean, Zane True's another good exponent of the handball, and he's sort of slid a little bit, but still a pretty quality player. And I mean, Bruin I rate pretty highly, and Alex Davies, of course, linked to Gold Coast, who's that big-bodied type who's gotten some Pendlebury comparisons. I think he sort of plays a little differently, but yeah, certainly a lot of class in that engine room, I think, to come from this year's draft.
Looking forward into the forward half and players that can also go through the engine room, we have the likes of Reef McGuinness, a Next Generation Academy player tied to Collingwood, Archie Perkins, who's tipped to go very high in the draft from the Sandringham Dragons, someone like a Braden Cook and a Braden Campbell, who is linked to the Sydney Swans. There's plenty of midfielder/forwards to look forward to in this year's draft pool.
Yeah, I mean, they're sort of the hybrid types that a lot of recruiters like to look at, maybe extended from a few others. So, I mean, we're always looking for the next Fife, Bontempelli, Cripps sort of types, those who can, move through the midfield with power and then impact up forward as well and mark. So, I mean, you look at the two Victorians there, McInnes and Perkins, they're two who would be perfect for Essendon, I feel. Just those sort of dynamic, taller midfielders with, I guess, stronger, bigger bodies who can bustle through the packs and, be those sort of generational players in future maybe.
Yeah, I think it's quite an exciting group in terms of the mid forwards. There's so many. You've got Campbell at that top end, who could come in. Perkins, we've already mentioned as that sort of a potential top 10 inside midfielder forward, and McInnes as well as that Collingwood NGA prospect who's inside mid. Could play forward, could play back. So they're very versatile, this group, as we sort of mentioned with some of the defenders and realistically a number of the midfielders, but particularly the forward group. Poulter as well as, coming through that as being that sort of forward, can play on a wing or, potentially in future go inside as well. So I think the group that they've got there is just incredibly talented, and McRae is obviously, Siobhan touched on earlier, great sort of balanced midfielder in there that can go through, and it's just a really good one.
Yeah, I mean, Campbell as well, let's not forget about him from Sydney, a guy who's been mentioned there. He's obviously a really classy ball user. He's got that penetrating kick, can run and gun, go inside, outside. So, as Pete said, these guys can play a lot of positions. There's going to be a lot of sort of upside and development left in their games. So, I mean, what a crop. We're sort of downplaying some of the evenness of the draft past maybe pick 20, but these guys are going to be pretty elite.
So many names and so much talent in the 2020 AFL draft pool. Not long now, we'll be answering all of your questions live. Thank you to Peter Williams and Michael Alvaro, who will be joined by Ed Pascoe, an AFL draft analyst, who will be doing round-by-round coverage with our team. Draft Central, AFL draft coverage, powered by Rookie Me.